What if I told you? The secret to wealth is not in your hands, but in your thoughts. Napoleon Hill spent 25 years studying the richest minds on earth. He discovered one truth. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. This isn't just a book. It's a blueprint, a mental formula that built empires. Welcome to Think and Grow Rich, where thoughts become fortunes. And this is Thinknova, your gateway to power, purpose, and prosperity. In a world fueled by dreams and powered by relentless ambition, one truth quietly governed those who rose above the ordinary. They were not always born wealthy. They did not always begin with privilege. But they had discovered a secret, a subtle yet unbreakable law that quietly shaped their destinies. This truth lay not in the size of their inheritance, but in the strength of their thoughts. And among those who observed this pattern and dedicated his life to decoding it, was a man named Napoleon Hill. Napoleon was not just a curious mind, but a determined seeker who, at the request of industrialist Andrew Carnegie, embarked on a mission that would span more than 2 decades. Carnegie, a man who had built one of the largest fortunes in American history, believed the power of thought, when mixed with definiteness of purpose and persistence, could lead anyone to greatness. He saw it not as a theory, but as a law of nature, as certain as gravity. He challenged Napoleon to meet and study the most successful people of the time, extract the principles that guided their ascent, and formulate them into a philosophy that could be shared with the world. Napoleon accepted the challenge. And so began one of the greatest quests in personal achievement ever documented. He spent more than 25 years interviewing titans of industry, pioneers of invention, masters of finance, and icons of politics. Among them were Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Alexander Graham Bell, Theodore Roosevelt, John D. Rockefeller, and more than 500 other towering figures. These individuals did not merely stumble into success. They had built it deliberately, and Hill began to understand how. He found that success left clues. At the core of every one of these achievers was a burning desire, a white-hot obsession with a goal so consuming that failure became unacceptable. They were not merely interested in winning, they were compelled. Napoleon called this the starting point of all achievement. He observed that desire, when reduced to a definite goal and backed by unwavering faith, had the power to transform the intangible into the tangible. These men did not wish for riches, they demanded them from life. Desire was the seed, faith watered it, action cultivated it, and the harvest was wealth, financial, personal, and spiritual. There was the story of Edwin C. Barnes, a man with no money and no influential connections. Yet he had a singular goal, to work with Thomas Edison, not for him, but as a business partner. This was not a vague wish. It was a definitive desire backed by action. Barnes left his hometown, took a freight train to Edison City, and presented himself at the inventor's laboratory. Though he had no qualifications, Edison felt the intensity of his desire and gave him a chance, a low-level job with no promise of advancement. Years passed, but Barnes never wavered. He studied the business. He watched. He waited. Then the moment came. Edison invented a new dictating machine that his salesmen struggled to market. Barnes saw an opportunity and seized it. He sold the device with such passion and effectiveness that Edison made him a partner in distributing the product. Barnes had achieved his goal, not through wealth or connections, but through desire, faith, and persistence. This became the first great principle Hill outlined. Desire is not a hope or a wish. It is a pulsating force that gives shape to thought and fuels action. It demands clarity. Vague wants lead to vague results. But a burning desire, clearly defined and emotionally charged, sets in motion a chain of events that bends reality to its shape. Faith, Hill discovered, was more than religious belief. It was belief in oneself, one's vision, and one's right to have what they desired. It was a mindset that acted as a bridge between thought and action. And faith could be cultivated through autosuggestion, repeating to oneself a definite purpose, a goal, over and over again, until it became embedded in the subconscious mind. Repetition was key. Hill observed that the human mind would believe what it heard frequently enough, whether it was true or false. That's why affirmations, when charged with emotion and belief, could transform a man riddled with doubt into one brimming with unstoppable confidence. The mind, when dominated by faith, became a magnet for ideas, people, and circumstances that supported that belief. He wrote of a man named Charles M. Schwab, who began his career as a humble laborer and rose to become the president of the United States Steel Corporation. Schwab possessed a quality that Carnegie admired more than raw intelligence. He had enthusiasm, belief in people, and faith in his vision. It was this belief, coupled with leadership and initiative, that enabled him to handle enormous responsibilities and lead with distinction. Faith did not mean waiting. It meant knowing. It meant acting as though success were inevitable. But belief alone was not enough. There had to be persistence, a refusal to quit. Hill found that most people gave up at the first sign of defeat. But the ones who succeeded treated failure not as an end but as feedback. They learned, they adjusted, they kept going. He recounted the tale of R.U. Darby, who was digging for gold. After discovering a vein of ore, Darby invested in equipment and began excavation. But the vein soon disappeared. Discouraged, he quit and sold his machinery to a junkman. That man, however, hired an engineer who studied the mine and discovered that the vein of gold was just 3 feet away from where Darby had stopped. The junkman went on to make millions. Darby learned his lesson and applied it elsewhere. He became one of the most successful insurance salesmen of his time because he had learned not to quit when faced with opposition. He had developed persistence. Hill emphasized that persistence was a state of mind, cultivated by desire, willpower, and habit. It was not innate. It could be built like muscle, by repeated effort, especially in the face of resistance. The accumulation of riches, he argued, required the application of these principles in a harmonious manner. One had to start with a clear, definite goal. That goal had to be fueled by burning desire. It had to be supported by unwavering faith. It had to be reinforced by repeated autosuggestion. It had to be pursued with persistence and action. But even with all this, one more element was vital: specialized knowledge. Hill clarified that general education did not lead to wealth. The world was filled with educated failures. What mattered was specific knowledge, organized and intelligently directed through practical plans of action. He told of Henry Ford, who had very little formal education but knew how to surround himself with experts. When asked difficult questions, he didn't pretend to know it all. He simply summoned one of his staff. Ford understood that knowledge alone was powerless unless organized into definite plans. And so, he built an empire not through schooling, but through focus, delegation, and decision. Decision, Hill believed, was another master key. He found that successful people made decisions quickly and changed them slowly. Unsuccessful people delayed decisions and changed them often. The world had little use for indecision. It responded to clarity. Those who hesitated were overtaken by those who acted. Those who waited for perfect conditions found themselves waiting forever. The story of Ford again illustrated this truth. When he decided to produce his now famous V8 engine, engineers told him it was impossible to cast an 8-cylinder engine block in one piece. Ford responded, "Produce it anyway." Months passed. Engineers kept failing, but Ford insisted they keep working. Eventually, they discovered a solution. Ford's decision had not wavered, and because of that, innovation emerged. Then there was the power of the mastermind. Hill observed that no man could climb to great heights alone. Behind every fortune was a team, a group of minds working in harmony, exchanging energy, ideas, and inspiration. This principle went beyond collaboration. It was the idea that when two or more minds joined in a spirit of harmony and purpose, they created a third, invisible force, a kind of collective intelligence greater than the sum of its parts. Thomas Edison had his laboratory of inventors. Henry Ford had his team of engineers and advisors. Andrew Carnegie had a brain trust of trusted lieutenants. Success was not a solo journey. It was a symphony. Each instrument contributed, but only together could they create something transcendent. Hill urged his readers to form their own mastermind groups, to surround themselves with people who shared their values, who challenged them, who believed in their vision. The environment mattered. So did emotion. Emotion gave thought its power. Faith, love, and sex were among the strongest of human feelings. And Hill noted that when these were mixed with thought, the mind vibrated at a higher frequency, making it more receptive to inspiration, intuition, and creative ideas. He called this the sixth sense, a kind of mental faculty that transcended logic, allowing the subconscious to tap into a higher intelligence. It could not be forced, but it could be cultivated. It emerged only when the other principles were already in place. It was, Hill wrote, the door to the temple of wisdom, and those who walked through it found not only riches, but deep fulfillment. As Napoleon Hill delved deeper into the minds of successful people, he began to understand the subtle and invisible machinery that guided the course of lives. The bridge between dreams and their fulfillment was not paved with chance, but with disciplined thought, organized planning, and relentless execution. Thought, he realized, was the most powerful force in the universe when directed with precision and purpose. But to direct thought effectively, one had to master the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind was the gateway to infinite intelligence. It absorbed every word, every belief, and every emotional vibration a person allowed to pass through their conscious mind. It did not judge. It only obeyed. If one fed it doubt, fear, and hesitation, it would yield a life of struggle. If one fed it confidence, desire, and clarity, it would organize circumstances to match those thoughts. The subconscious mind worked day and night. It took instructions, deliberately given or unconsciously absorbed, and acted upon them with mathematical accuracy. This made autosuggestion one of the most powerful tools in the arsenal of achievement. Autosuggestion was the act of feeding the mind with repeated affirmations of one's goal, spoken aloud with emotion, belief, and persistence. These affirmations impressed the goal upon the subconscious, eventually guiding every action, reaction, and decision toward its fulfillment. Hill urged his readers not to merely wish for success, but to instruct their minds in specific, emotional language, describing in detail what they wanted, when they wanted it, and what they were willing to give in return. Desire without clarity was powerless, and clarity without repetition was soon forgotten. He proposed a 6-step formula. Fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. Determine what you intend to give in return. Establish a definite date by which you intend to possess it. Create a clear, concise statement of these details. Read that statement aloud twice daily, once in the morning, once at night, and most importantly, believe it as you speak it. This practice would plant the goal into the subconscious, allowing it to grow like a seed, drawing to it all the nourishment it required to flourish. But no garden could grow in the presence of weeds, and the greatest weeds of the mind were fear, doubt, and indecision. Fear was the invisible enemy. It crept silently, wrapped in logic and disguise, and drained the mind of its creative power. Hill identified 6 basic fears that afflicted mankind: fear of poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death. Each one was a silent killer of dreams. They bred procrastination, hesitation, and paralysis. Hill taught that fear could be defeated only through awareness and action. You had to name it, face it, and move anyway. He told the story of a man whose business had failed multiple times. He had invested years, money, and energy into ideas that simply didn't work. Each time he failed, the fear of poverty tightened its grip. But he made a decision. He would no longer let fear dictate his future. He analyzed his failures, extracted the lessons, and moved forward with a new plan. This time he succeeded, not because the plan was perfect, but because his mind was no longer bound by fear. The moment he reclaimed control of his thoughts, He reclaimed control of his results. Hill emphasized that thoughts were magnets. Whatever you held in your mind with emotion, you attracted. Fear attracted more fear. Confidence attracted opportunity. This wasn't magic. It was law. A mind dominated by fear became indecisive, hesitant, and weak. A mind dominated by desire became bold, focused, and resilient. One of the great truths Hill uncovered was that riches seldom come in the form one expects. Often, opportunity disguises itself as misfortune or defeat. It arrives wearing the clothes of loss, testing a person's resolve. And only those who persist through the storm find the treasure on the other side. He spoke of the great inventor Thomas Edison, whose thousands of experiments led to failure after failure before discovering the electric light bulb. Where others saw defeat, Edison saw data. He reframed failure not as evidence of incapability, but as education. Hill argued that every failure carried with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit, but only to the eyes that knew where to look. The ability to extract good from adversity required emotional maturity and mental discipline. It required a willingness to ask different questions. Instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" successful people asked, "What is this trying to teach me?" And in that shift, they found wisdom. Another vital lesson Hill drew from his research was the importance of imagination. Not idle daydreaming, but synthetic and creative imagination. The kind that converted thought into plan, and plan into fortune. Synthetic imagination took existing ideas and rearranged them into new combinations. Creative imagination, on the other hand, tapped into higher consciousness, delivering flashes of insight and innovation that could not be logically explained. This was how great inventions were born, how revolutions in business were sparked, how empires were built. But the imagination was a muscle. It had to be exercised. It responded to discipline, stimulation, and emotional engagement. The more one dwelled upon their goal with intensity and belief, the more the imagination supplied ideas, strategies, and inspiration to bring it about. Ideas were, Hill wrote, the starting point of all fortunes. But an idea without action was useless, so he turned his attention to organized planning. He wrote that failure to plan was one of the most common reasons for failure in life. A goal without a plan was only a wish. And even a good plan, if not acted upon, produced no results. Hill instructed his readers to create definite plans for the attainment of their desire, put those plans into action immediately, and if the first plan failed, to create another and another until success was achieved. He advised forming alliances with others, people who could bring skills, knowledge, or insight that the dreamer lacked. He called these people members of your master mind. Plans needed to be flexible, but their purpose had to remain firm. Too many gave up when the first or second plan didn't work. They saw failure as final. But Hill taught that every plan was a draft, and behind every success was a history of adjusted plans. He emphasized the power of decision. Indecision, he observed, was a habit cultivated by fear and fed by procrastination. But decision was power. It cut through uncertainty. It commanded resources. It activated courage. The most successful men he studied made decisions promptly and clearly. They listened to their own inner voice and backed it with action. Others might not understand. They might criticize or mock. But the decision-maker moved forward regardless. Henry Ford was famous for his unwavering decisions. Even when his advisors warned him against certain moves, he stuck to his judgment. This stubbornness, while sometimes costly in the short term, ultimately led to massive innovation and wealth. Hill noted that success demanded a form of positive arrogance, the belief that one's vision was valid and worthy, even when the world had not yet recognized it. And still, belief was not enough. You had to persist. Persistence was the sustained effort needed to induce faith and translate desire into its financial equivalent. Without persistence, desire faded. Plans dissolved. Faith withered. Persistence was the glue. It held all the other principles together. Hill pointed out that many had moments of enthusiasm. They attended seminars, read books, made resolutions. But then life got hard. Obstacles appeared, doubt returned, and they gave up. The winners were those who kept moving. They reignited their desire daily. They fed their faith hourly. They practiced their auto-suggestions relentlessly. They refused to let temporary defeat become permanent failure. He told of people who tried and failed for years, decades even. But because they never stopped, they eventually succeeded. Persistence became a force more powerful than genius or talent. And behind that persistence was often an emotional driver, something deeper than money or fame. It was the belief that their success would mean something bigger, something personal, something spiritual. Hill knew that every person would face moments of darkness, times when all seemed lost. He advised that this was the exact moment to push forward, to remind oneself of the goal, to reaffirm the desire, to take even the smallest action. Action, he said, was the antidote to fear. When the body moved, the mind shifted. The spirit rose. Momentum returned. And slowly the tide turned. He urged his readers to burn their ships, to eliminate retreat as an option, to commit so fully to their goal that no plan B existed. Only then would the full power of their mind awaken. Only then would the universe begin to respond. Success, Hill concluded, was not for the lucky. It was not reserved for the chosen few. It was for the committed, the bold, the persistent, and above all, those who believed in the unseen power of their own thoughts. As Napoleon Hill continued to unlock the invisible levers behind extraordinary success, he began to notice a pattern that extended beyond effort and planning. There was a force, intangible yet immensely real, that appeared to guide the minds and hands of those who refused to give up. It was as though something beyond logic began to cooperate with those who had mastered desire, faith, and persistent action. Hill came to identify this mysterious force as infinite intelligence. He believed that infinite intelligence was accessible to every human being through the subconscious mind and the sixth sense. But it did not respond to doubt. It did not cooperate with the fearful or the indecisive. It flowed only to the minds that had made a clear, emotionally charged request, those who had tuned their thoughts like a radio set to the correct frequency. The sixth sense, Hill explained, was not something that could be forced or demanded. It came quietly, often unexpectedly, as a sudden idea, an inspired hunch, or a flash of intuition that lit up the mind. This was the faculty through which infinite intelligence communicated. It was the channel through which creative ideas, life-changing decisions, and seemingly miraculous events entered the lives of those prepared to receive them. Preparation was everything. Before the sixth sense awakened, one had to master the other principles: desire, faith, auto-suggestion, specialized knowledge, imagination, organized planning, decision, persistence, and the power of the master mind. Only then would this invisible sense begin to stir, like a door opening between the conscious mind and the universal storehouse of knowledge. Hill spoke of moments when great leaders, inventors, and artists claimed to have felt an unseen hand guiding their decisions. It was as though they were being led by something higher. This wasn't mysticism. It was a result of disciplined thought and spiritual openness. And yet, even the best prepared minds could be sabotaged by one thing: negative emotion. Fear, jealousy, hatred, revenge, greed, superstition, and anger. These 6 negative emotions polluted the subconscious and blocked communication with infinite intelligence. They clouded judgment, they attracted more negativity, and they weakened the very forces a person needed to move forward. To neutralize these forces, Hill emphasized the need for self-discipline. One had to cultivate the opposite: love, faith, hope, kindness, joy, and serenity. These were not mere virtues. They were strategic tools in the mind's arsenal, each one capable of transforming the vibrations of thought and attracting new circumstances. He offered the practice of emotional awareness, being vigilant about what one allowed into the mind. Every day, people were surrounded by conversations, news, and experiences that activated fear or doubt. To guard against this, one had to become a mental gatekeeper, allowing only those thoughts and emotions that aligned with their purpose. And purpose, Hill stressed, was everything. A definite chief aim in life gave meaning to every step. Without a goal, the mind wandered. It got distracted. It followed whims. With a goal, every thought, action, and encounter could be measured against that aim. Was it helping? Was it delaying? Was it empowering? One either moved closer to the goal or further from it. There was no neutral. Hill encouraged readers to write out their chief aim in life, a clear statement of what they wanted to achieve, by when, and why. This written statement was to be read daily, aloud, with emotion and belief. Over time, this practice would etch the goal into the subconscious, creating a sense of inevitability that would power their decisions and habits. He reminded them that success was not an accident, it was a creation. And at the center of that creation stood thought. Thought was the starting point of all wealth, health, and happiness. But it had to be controlled, directed, and refined. Most people, Hill said, allowed their minds to drift. They reacted to life rather than designing it. They accepted whatever came their way, and then blamed fate. The successful, on the other hand, acted. They chose their thoughts the way a gardener chose seeds. They weeded out the negative, planted the positive, and nourished their minds daily. Over time, the harvest came. One of the most powerful examples Hill offered was the story of a deaf-mute child born to a poor family, his own son. When the child was born, doctors told Hill that the boy would never hear or speak. But Hill refused to accept that outcome. He began feeding his child thoughts of ability, not disability. He whispered affirmations. He instilled belief. He acted as though hearing was not only possible, but certain. Years passed. The child struggled, but he learned. He developed partial hearing. He taught himself to speak. Eventually, he found a device that allowed him to hear with near-perfect clarity. He then began helping other children with similar disabilities, showing them that hope was real and transformation was possible. Hill was convinced that it was not luck or science alone that led to his son's success. It was belief, auto-suggestion, and persistent desire. It was proof that the principles worked, even in the most difficult of situations. Throughout his research, Hill encountered countless individuals who started with nothing, no money, no formal education, no powerful connections, but who rose to great success by mastering their minds. He found that money was not the only measure of riches. True wealth, he wrote, included peace of mind, sound health, harmonious relationships, freedom from fear, the capacity for hope, and a sense of purpose. These were the riches that money could not buy, but which were often found in abundance in the lives of those who mastered these principles. Still, financial success was often the visible reward, and Hill never shied away from addressing the importance of prosperity. He viewed money not as an evil, but as a neutral tool, one that amplified who a person already was. In the hands of the wise, it became a force for good. In the hands of the undisciplined, it brought ruin. This is why he placed so much emphasis on character. Integrity, he said, was the foundation upon which lasting success was built. Cheaters might win for a season, but their fortune was unstable. It crumbled under pressure. But those who built their wealth with honesty, generosity, and service to others created empires that endured. Service, in fact, was one of Hill's most profound insights. He noticed that the most successful people all had one thing in common. They gave more value than they received. They focused not on what they could take, but on what they could contribute. Hill called this the law of increasing returns. The universe, he argued, rewarded service with abundance. When one helped others succeed, one could not help but succeed themselves. This was not just a moral idea, it was a practical strategy. In business, in leadership, in innovation, those who solved real problems, who uplifted others, who led with empathy and vision, always attracted wealth. but they also attracted respect, loyalty, and legacy. That, to Hill, was true success. Another concept he explored in great depth was the relationship between the mind and the body. He believed that physical energy, especially that generated by emotion and desire, could be transmuted into creative power. One of the most controversial chapters in his book was about the transmutation of sexual energy. He noted that some of the most productive, creative, and driven individuals in history had learned to redirect their physical energy into mental and spiritual achievement. They were motivated not merely by ambition, but by a deep emotional force. When properly channeled, that energy became genius. Hill urged his readers to understand the power of emotion, not to repress it, but to guide it. Emotion gave color to thought. It gave life to plans. It animated belief, but only when directed. Uncontrolled emotion led to chaos. Directed emotion led to creation. Hill's message, though filled with strategies and techniques, was deeply spiritual at its core. He believed in a power greater than the individual, a universal intelligence that cooperated with those who aligned their thoughts and actions with purpose. And this power, he wrote, could be accessed by anyone. There were no special secrets held by the elite. There were only laws that worked for anyone who obeyed them. The law of cause and effect, the law of belief, the law of attraction, the law of compensation. Hill was not offering a quick fix. He was offering a blueprint, a long road, a demanding one, but a road that, if walked with integrity and persistence, led to a life of unimaginable richness. And the best part was this: it started with nothing but a thought. As Napoleon Hill brought his philosophy to its culmination, he returned once more to the silent, shaping power of thought. Everything, every invention, every fortune, every empire, had first existed as an idea. And just as a seed carries the blueprint of a tree, each thought carried within it the potential to create a new life, but only if nurtured with care. Hill's closing thoughts were as much a challenge as they were a gift. He had offered the laws. He had revealed the principles. But the transformation, he made clear, would only happen if the reader applied them with sincerity and endurance. Knowledge, in his eyes, was not power, only potential. Power came from the use of that knowledge. He urged the reader to reflect on their habits. Were their days guided by purpose? Were their thoughts soaked in belief? Was their plan detailed or vague? Were their efforts persistent or sporadic? These questions were not rhetorical. They were the mirror in which one had to examine the foundation of their destiny. Hill had spent decades assembling the truths revealed by hundreds of successful men and women. And if one thing stood out above all, it was that success demanded clarity of purpose. Purpose was the compass. It gave direction to thought, discipline to emotion, and focus to energy. Those without purpose drifted. Those with purpose advanced. They woke up with intention. They endured hardship with resolve. They moved through life with an inner certainty that silenced fear and confusion. Hill believed that success was never accidental. It was always deliberate. And part of that deliberateness was maintaining harmony with others. No man achieved greatness in isolation. Whether in business, relationships, or personal development, the ability to work well with others was paramount. He emphasized the value of harmony, not just with people, but within oneself. A conflicted mind could not produce consistent results. Harmony between thought and action, between belief and behavior, between desire and discipline. These inner alignments created momentum that could not be stopped. He also returned to the idea of the mastermind group, a collection of minds working together in spirit of harmony for a definite purpose, created a power far greater than any one mind alone could harness. This was not theory. It was observable. The great industrial empires, the landmark innovations, the legendary movements of history, none were solo endeavors. Behind every great leader was a team of committed minds, unified in thought, even if diverse in skill. But even as Hill celebrated the external structures of support, he always returned to the inner world. For that was where the true battle was waged, against fear, against doubt, against inertia. Hill understood these enemies well. He had seen them destroy talent, sabotage potential, and drown dreams. They appeared in small ways, in delay, in distraction, in discouragement. But their roots were always the same: uncontrolled thought. To overcome them, one had to become the master of their mind, the commander of their emotional state, the architect of their habits. One of the most important techniques Hill offered was the daily practice of reflection and self-examination. At the end of each day, he encouraged readers to ask themselves, "What did I do today to move toward my definite goal? Did I let fear or procrastination slow me down? Did I act with belief or with hesitation? Did I seek the company of those who inspire and uplift me? Did I offer value to others without expectation?" This practice, he believed, sharpened awareness and strengthened resolve. It kept the goal alive in consciousness. It prevented drift. Hill was honest about the fact that success demanded effort. There would be setbacks. There would be loneliness. There would be days when nothing seemed to work. But those were not signs of failure. They were tests. Tests of belief. Tests of discipline. Tests of how badly one truly wanted the result. He warned against quitting too soon, against mistaking temporary defeat for permanent failure, against assuming that progress should be fast and easy. Instead, he celebrated the power of steady growth, brick by brick, day by day, effort by effort. He told stories of men who worked in obscurity for years before their breakthrough came. They were not the most gifted, but they were the most committed. And commitment, in Hill's view, always won. In his final message, Hill reminded readers that wealth was a byproduct of personal growth. The riches one gained on the outside were a reflection of who they had become on the inside. A disciplined thinker, a purposeful dreamer, a person who refused to settle. He challenged the reader to look within and ask, "Do I believe I deserve success? Am I willing to pay the price in discipline and persistence? Have I made a clear, specific demand of life? Am I acting as if that outcome is inevitable?" These were not soft questions. They were spiritual demands. Because ultimately, Hill believed that success was not merely about money or even fame. It was about mastery. Mastery of thought, mastery of purpose, mastery of self. He closed his teachings with the statement that every person holds, within their own mind, the key to heaven or hell. The thoughts they choose, the beliefs they nurture, the decisions they make. These are the tools with which they build their world. No one else could think for them. No one else could act for them. The choice was theirs. And so, with every word he wrote, Hill handed that choice back to the reader. Not as a burden, but as a gift. Because in that choice was the power to change everything. To take an idea, to fuel it with emotion, to speak it with belief, to act on it with resolve, and to shape reality from thought. This was the alchemy of the mind. This was the legacy of Think and Grow Rich. A philosophy not for the faint-hearted, but for the committed. Not for the passive, but for the passionate. Not for those who merely wished, but for those who demanded, of themselves and of life. For those who were ready to dream with eyes open, to labor with faith intact, to endure with vision unshaken, to rise again and again until their thought became form, their desire became wealth, and their purpose became reality. Because in the end, riches are not found in gold or banknotes alone. They are found in the mind that dares to think boldly, the heart that dares to believe fiercely, and the spirit that dares to grow beyond all limits. This is not just a book. It is a call, a challenge, a mirror, and a map. For those brave enough to take it seriously, it holds the power to change not just a life, but a legacy. Riches don't start in your bank account. They start in your mind. Napoleon Hill revealed a timeless truth. Desire, faith, and action. Together, they create miracles. If this journey lit a spark in you, don't let it die in silence. Feed it with belief, fuel it with purpose, and build the future you once only dreamed of. Subscribe to Thinknova, where every story is a step toward the life you deserve. Because you don't just hope to grow rich, you think and grow rich.